You're all welcome to be seated. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
It's nice to be back. It's been a couple weeks. I had a very interesting conversation earlier this week. I was speaking to somebody who reached out to me because she was interested in exploring Judaism. She had some Judaism in her history, but she wasn't halakhically Jewish. She wasn't a practicing Jew. She didn't really identify as being Jewish at all. But she decided to reach out to me and kind of see what it was all about. And we started talking about some of the different values within Judaism. And at some point in time, we talked about the value of tzedakah, the value of charity, of giving to the poor. And her response to me was, well, why would we do that? And I have to say, I don't think I've ever gotten that response before, right? It doesn't matter sort of what your background is. It doesn't matter what your religious tradition is. Most people understand the idea of giving tzedakah, giving charity, giving in some sort of way. But she actually came and she said, I don't understand that value. And we started to get into a conversation about the benefits or detriments of giving tzedakah. And actually, I began to realize that from her mind, she was making an economic argument, not a value-based argument. And it actually sparked a different conversation that we had. Because I would say that that's one of the most potent aspects of Judaism, is that we don't only look at things through the lens of pragmatism, although I would argue that Judaism is a very pragmatic religion in a lot of different ways, but we look at it in terms of the value, And it got me thinking as we read this week's Torah portion, which talks about tzedakah, of what is the value behind tzedakah? What is the value behind tzedakah? And some people would argue, well, tzedakah is in and of itself a Jewish value. And I think you can make an argument for that, but I think there's actually a deeper value that's behind the way that we do tzedakah. So let's look at this week's Torah portion and try to get a sense of it. I'm starting on page 1077. And I'm going to start on verse 4, because I always read this verse and I kind of chuckle to myself, because it really shows the difference between the ideal and the reality. Verse 4, there shall be no needy people among you, since the Lord your God will bless you in the land the Lord your God is giving you as a hereditary portion. There's going to be no poor. Now we look at the real world and we say, okay, let's go down to verse 7. If, however, there is a needy person among you, one of your kinsmen, or any of your in any of your settlements in the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kinsman. Verse 8, rather you must open your hand and lend him sufficient for whatever he needs. The English translation doesn't do the Hebrew quite justice. If you look at the Hebrew, ki patoach tiftach et yadcha, it's a doubling of the word open. You shall surely open your hand. V'havet ta'avitenu, right? You shall lend him, give him, again, a doubling of that word. De machsaro asher yechaser, another doubling. So there's 3 doublings of Hebrew words in this one short verse. So my question for us today is, looking at this verse, let's try to parse out what is the value behind the concept of tzedakah. Diana?
First of all, it's a mitzvah aseh. So
Okay.
you are commanded to do this. One other thing about the Hebrew, though, it says asher yachsar lo. It's kind of like what he's lacking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's more than what he needs. Like I see it as like basic dignity: food, clothing, shelter. Not a bigger house or more clothes or a better steak or something. It's like
So Diana's saying two things. One, it's a mitzvah taseh. It's a positive commandment. It's something that we need to go out and do, as opposed to a mitzvah lo ta'aseh, which is just, you could have just said, you shall not walk by the, your neighbor who's in need. Okay, that's a more passive sort of thing. But no, this is actually, you have to go out and you have to do it.
you have to do it. And then the other thing that I was going to say that I forgot about. It'll come back to me. Sorry.
Okay, think about it and we'll come back to you. Michal.
I think it's really interesting that God
Oh, I
is
know.
so incredibly thoughtful that he's already gone through, I've given you enough, but on the chance that somebody doesn't have enough, you have to give him plenty and make sure you don't get manipulative and say it's almost the seventh year and he's going to be able to collect whatever, but I don't have to give.
Right. So God says, I've given you enough, but just in case, right? Not, which, by the way, I think is so powerful in and of itself. Because God's statement is, there is enough for everybody. And if they're not, by the way, it's your fault. It's the way that you human beings are running, are living life, right? Are doing things. It's not my fault. It's your fault as to how you're using your resources and how you're dividing things up and whether or not you're taking care of each other, right? It's a whole different way of looking at the world. You remember what you had to say?
Well, so they're saying it's about, if you're talking about it in the context of tzedakah, the root is tzedek, which is being righteous.
Righteousness.
Which is a little different from, but you don't want to be like all virtue signally about it either, like, oh, I'm so righteous. Which is a little bit different from gemilut chasadim, just an act of kindness. This is like a leveling up of righteousness in the vein of like tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, like how to, we're always trying to level up with
So the word righteousness, right, in Hebrew, tzedakah, right? Charity, righteousness, it's not really charity, but it's the way we translate it, stems from the root of justice, right? Of justice. And that's where it's coming from. Okay, Isaac.
I think that I'm using something very not rabbinic and talk about the context of the verse we're talking about. The rabbis love to take verses out of context, but I'm going to put it back in context.
Okay.
It's very interesting that this passage is about the Shemitah year. And
Yeah.
it's talking about the process of Shemitah. And a few verses after the passage we're talking about, they discuss that this is specifically in the context of don't refuse to give loans because the Shemitah year is coming up when debt is raised.
Correct.
And it's interesting. It almost seems to me like what this is saying is that I'm curious as to what that says about tzedakah. That what they're suggesting almost is that the best way to give tzedakah is a loan rather than a gift. And even if the Shemitah year is coming out, which means for all intents and purposes it is a gift, framing it as a loan might is more righteous somehow. It might say something about how we see a lot of people don't want to take help if they feel like they can't return the help.
Beautiful. So, first of all, I think you're exactly right. They're talking about in this context of Shemitah year and loans. And if it weren't Shabbat, I would pay you for that perfect segue into the Talmudic passage, right? That I wanted to share. There's a story about Mar Ukba, who has there was a poor person in his neighborhood. The first story I want to say is about of Rav Yonah, who saw somebody from a family who had lost all of his money, and he was actually ashamed to accept charity. And so his answer to that is he would go to him and he would say, I heard that there was an inheritance coming your way. Right? I heard through the grapevine that relative has died and there's an inheritance coming your way from across the sea. So here is an article. Go sell it. I'm giving you this as a loan so that you can go and you can do what you need to do. Go sell it. Then when you get your inheritance, pay me back. And then once he accepts it, later on, he says, by the way, it's a gift. This idea of starting it off from a loan and moving to a gift is something the rabbis pick up on. And it's a very interesting sort of way of doing it. But we're still not quite at that deep value yet of what it is that we're talking about here. And Danny, you mentioned it, but then you mentioned it in the course of a lot of different things. But I want to bring that word out, right? If you look at this, the value is actually human dignity. Human dignity is the value that is behind this. It's not about economic parity. It's not about any of those sorts of things. It's about human dignity. And how do we see that? How do we see that? We go back to this verse, and we see that it's, again, divided into two. So it says, you shall give this person sufficient for their needs and that which he lacks. And the rabbis say, well, those are two different things, right? The sufficient for his needs is the monetary piece of it. That which he lacks is the dignity piece of it. And the rabbis pick this up and say that tzedakah, that this needs to be done in such a way that maintains both of those ideas. Not just, okay, well, I'm going to give this person so they can, they can eat, but I'm going to make them feel bad about it. I'm going to make them feel bad about it. What's interesting is, right, if we had to pick a word, what is the word that is the opposite of dignity? What words would you pick? Opposite of dignity. Shame. Yeah. The opposite of dignity is shame. And shame is something that is so potent and so corrosive. Anybody who wants to really read about that, go read any of Brené Brown's books, right? I mean, she is that person who talks about that. She says shame corrodes the very part of us that believes that we're capable of change. It paralyzes us. It doesn't allow us to change. And the whole idea of tzedakah, right? The whole idea of tzedakah is affecting change for this person. The idea isn't that we continue to give them forever and ever and ever, support them forever and ever and ever. And there are some people who may need that. But the idea is that we're giving them what they need, what they lack, so that they can change. They can find a way to step forward, to move out of that place where they are. And if we wrap it, if we embody it with this sense of shame, they won't and they can't. To me, that's the value behind all of this. And I wish I had thought of that as I was speaking to this woman that I was talking to earlier, right? Because I was talking about, well, the value of helping, the value of being there, all these different sorts of things, but what it comes down to ultimately is, right? B'Tselem Elohim, we're in the image of God. Every human being needs to live and be able to have that sense of dignity. And that's why I think this is connected into the Shemitah year. And that's why, by the way, this idea of being there for the poor and the fatherless and the orphan and all, right, the stranger, is repeated so many times throughout our text. Not as a statement of the way that we should run our economic policies or anything like that, but as a statement of our values of human dignity. That's where it begins. Any comments before we actually go into our Torah reading today?